everybody. It's Daniel Aaron here. This is The Art of Vibrant Living. We are joined today by Edward Clark, who is a great friend and an amazing yoga teacher, and I'll tell you more about him in a moment. Thank you to Longevity Drops, our sponsor for the show, and happy almost full rockin' moon, y'all. Edward, I'm so happy that you're on the show. Edward Clark, I first met actually nearly 20 years ago at a yoga conference when I was just very new to the yoga world, and I was all excited about learning to stand on my hands and on my head and on my nose. And Edward Clark not only could do all of those things beyond what anyone else could do, he had this theater troupe of people that did this synchronized movement, dance, advanced yoga thing that just blew me and everybody else away. From then I said, I want to study with this guy, and I started learning from him. Found out that not only is he an incredible philosopher and funny guy, which you'll see, I threatened to steal his jokes. He's also, I'd say, the master of what Vinyasa yoga is, and for that reason, I've bring Edward to teach on every one of my trainings that I possibly can, because nobody in the world understands or teaches Vinyasa in the way that he does. And if you don't know what Vinyasa is, it's a kind of yoga, and we'll get into it a little bit on this show. So without further blah blah, I will stop and say, Edward, thank you for being here with us today.
Oh gosh, Daniel, after that introduction, I'm so nervous.
And
hello, happy followers of the Art of Vibrant Living. We're so glad to be here today.
All right, now Edward is here and humble and silly, and yet I think what we're going to get into has potential to be even sillier and perhaps more profound than what most of us talk about most of the time. This is, I don't know, well, I'll say no more. Edward,
launch in.
Tell us.
Yes. Well, when Daniel and I were discussing via email Edward, what will you talk about? Daniel, what shall I talk about? What can we talk about? I hit upon the idea of talking about infinity, and already I'm bored with the idea, infinity. And I think that's because we've become so accustomed to the idea of infinity that, oh yeah, infinity, it's just another number, and sort of the vastness of what it is no longer, or perhaps never, imposes upon our thinking of it. It's, oh yeah, 3,000,000,012, big number, infinity, another big number. But the great notion behind infinity, I think, is obvious. It's boundless. It is beyond boundaries. It has no perimeter. It is grander than finite creatures are capable of considering. And yet, in terms of what the universe is meant to be, or what reality is assumed to be, it's a unified thing. It is singular. It is vast, and it is grand. And yet we are, as individuals, meant to appreciate somehow and become, in yoga terms, one with. You always have to say it in that kind of a voice. Let me just do that again. Become one with the all, this vastness that contains everything without destroying it, as it were, and it has some kind of unity. Talking about vibrant living, and I'm laughing because there's a dog barking at my end here, and it's not me. It's the dogs of infinity who are hounding me. There's this notion of what we are and what is, that we look at ourselves, and I know in everybody in the entire sort of yoga, new age, whatever you want to call it, marketplace, somewhere you jam in the word transform or transformative, because that's the speak of the day, and we're trying to be these things which are one thing and which is going to change into another thing in the context of this vastness. So it's like infinity in terms of the universe or reality or the absolute or totality. It's a ground base singularity in which these forms occur, and so we're talking like we're individual forms, and we presume that yes, that's me, as if there's a kind of finality to that, and the notion, I think, underlying what infinity or the universe or this vastness is that the thing that holds it together is not that it's a thing, it's that it's a process, and the forms that occur within this process are equally transitory. And the idea of transformation or change is inevitable. What you do, how much control you have over that is to a degree slim. You make certain efforts to try to be a better person, which again, you always have to say in that try to be a better person voice is sort of got a finger wagging at you at the same time as you say it. Or I'm not going to be weak anymore, or I'm not going to be so defensive anymore, or whatever it is. But inevitably, that will happen anyway. So I'm thinking, partly just looking at what sort of things Daniel teaches and the kind of things that I teach, that one endeavors to develop a modicum of control over this change without the presumption that it is actually controllable, perhaps only slightly influenceable. Having said all that, I think it's time to say, Daniel, what do you think of all that?
There's so many things that I think of all of that. Yeah, I mean, part of what you brought up there is the idea of, do we actually have any control or ability to manipulate what happens? And I mean, you got into the idea of Advaita Vedanta in a way in there, and in yoga.
I love it when you speak Sanskrit at me.
One of my pet peeves about the yoga world, present company excluded, of course, but so many of the folks that get into the yoga world get so rigid, and there's certainly an understandable aspect of yoga that teaches us to control everything from the most minute movements of our body to our breath. And it's easy, and yet the whole idea is to create some kind of freedom in ourselves and in life.
Subjugate the body to achieve freedom.
So yeah, interesting questions you bring up, and I think certainly the idea of infinity. Well, actually, let me step it back a moment, perhaps, because not all of our viewers here are necessarily into kooky yoga stuff in the way that we have been. So perhaps what I was going to say is the way you talk about infinity just now, the way you talked about it, makes a lot of sense in the way you teach yoga asana in terms of the vinyasa. Though for those who don't know vinyasa or your particular emphasis on it, that might be a little
Impossible. How could no
impossible.
one know? They don't know it?
Well, only a couple. Just this is a
Yeah.
couple, but we want to bring them in slowly. So,
Shocked
from
and deeply hurt.
would you give a quick perspective for folks on what vinyasa is and how it relates to what you're talking about?
Well, I think I'm stuttering here, like I've never talked about vinyasa before. I think the notion that underlies vinyasa, and it is a premise that I am. It's not something that is a proven truth, but it's that there is a flow of time, that there is passage of some sort, duration. And that flow is, at the moment, I think for technical reasons, is considered, there would, sorry, this really does sound like I've never talked about vinyasa before. Time flowing evenly. So the changes that I was talking about happening to forms within a reality is that the changes are happening at an even rate, and the person doing a vinyasa attempts to make their breath move smoothly, and the sound of it smoothly, the flow of the air smoothly. They attempt to synchronize the breath with the movement so that the evenness of the movement is matched or synchronized with the evenness of the breath, and the presumption being that that is brought about by, or brings about, an evenness of mind. It's very difficult to breathe smoothly and move smoothly if your mind is in an agitated state. So this is in some respects seems to be contrary to what contemporary traditional yoga considers to be the purpose of it. In contemporary yoga, asanas seeks stillness in the body, and perhaps stillness in the breath, and stillness in the mind, an unchangingness. And Vinyasa's notion is that because all is change, how you discover the unity of the universe is through trying to achieve a synchronization with this flow. Now, of course, caveats could be put on that. Does time, in fact, flow at an even rate? That's merely a premise. It could be, and there are other possibilities. It could be that time is gradually speeding up, or gradually slowing down, moving into a state of entropy, in which case the stillness yogis might prove to be right in the long run. Or it could be that time fluctuates at eccentric rates. Could be that there's no time at all. So there's 5 possibilities. But the technical work in Vinyasa assumes that it is flowing at an even rate, and one endeavors to achieve a oneness with this flow, hopefully finding what the infinity of the absolute, the universe, is by accustoming oneself to that. One of the nice things about the vinyasa and the way in which it uses breath is that it gives quite a realistic or finite time framework. You have the duration of an inhale in which to try and make the sound of the inhale be smooth, make the movement of the flow of the breath be smooth, make the movement be flowing. But it's just for the duration of that inhale, and then likewise for an exhale. And because these are such finite lengths of time, it's not, I would say, oversimplifying shockingly, what you do in the meditational aspect of normal, whatever that is, yoga, wherein you try and not think, to bring the mind to a place of stillness for an extended period of time. Rather, your mind is active, but it's equating this evenness, I would say, with the stillness that other generations of yogis may have sought. How was that for a really concise explanation? Is everybody still awake?
That's it. Yes, thank you. And it's probably worth us. Part of what I get, and I'm hoping that the people with us are getting here, is that there is a relationship between infinity, oneness, and the sort of even or continuous movement of vinyasa in the way that we understand it. And at the same time, we're talking about this, and you're being very concise, Edward. The
so no one's ever said that before. Can I put that on my website?
Part of what what our viewers are getting is some, which you may not be seeing, some of the video of your previous performances, you and some of the others. And so, what would you say in terms of, most of the modern world still thinks of, or most of the contemporary Western world thinks of yoga as being this set of movements or exercise or a fitness regime, even though there's certainly lip service paid to, well, yoga means oneness, and that this is really a spiritual thing, and if I do yoga I wear a mala and I'm spiritual, and still the main thing that people think of, and largely what's taught and what people experience, is it being just a physical thing. And so we're having this philosophical conversation about it. At the same time, people are seeing some of what you've done and what the others in Tripsichore have done, which is for the normal person, even for the advanced yogi, it's pretty fantastical looking. Like, holy moly, how could they possibly do that? It seems surreal and impossible. So, in terms of control, oneness, vinyasa, eternity, and then that physical stuff that y'all are doing in those videos, what's the connection there? What would you say?
Well, I'm going to seemingly lead off with the word melancholy. Or perhaps yearning is the word that I look for. And I think one of the great things about a physical philosophy, such as I think yoga is that it recognizes that it will never have a true understanding of the whole. I was saying in Vinyasa, you have a breath during which you appreciate evenness, and during that breath, certain kind of understandings about what was going on for the duration of that time may come to you. But when you take the next breath, things have moved on, and it's an appreciation that you're not going to get the whole understanding of the entirety of time or the entirety of the universe, but breath by breath, or a bit by bit, you glean something of what is going on, and develop an appreciation for it, a discrimination, a taste for it. And I think this is what an artist is privileged to do. They usually have to pay for the privilege, mind, but they, I'm speaking idealistically here, they take something out of their head, they have a vision which reveals something, excuse me, about that which is familiar, but shows it in a new light. And it's not that they're trying hard to be novel. What they are is original in the sense that they go back to the origin of that which is familiar and show it to us in a new way, in a way that goes, oh, I know what that is. And yet it's not utterly graspable. And this is, again, the nature of what I'm saying, the yoga philosophy experience is. Hopefully, I think good art also is quite entertaining and stimulating, and develops an awe of some kind because you immerse yourself in the art of that. And I think then, you know, in the technical practice of what Tripsichore is, my company and the name of the technique we do, is this deeply immersive thing where we're not projecting into the future per se. We're taking instead something that has been, which did not exist before, and which we have deliberately created and brought into being. I was saying earlier about what is the modicum of influence that we can have on our change. Well, the artist is in a sense privileged to, in fact, render something and put it into the world. What effect it ultimately has on each person who sees that art, whether it's dance or a painting or a piece of music, you can't exactly say, but to some degree you influence what they think. So it's a very specific way of influencing change without you know, bringing it around to a directly projectable sort of result. How is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, again, it brings up more good questions along the way. And I will pause before I ask my next one, or the next thing I want to say about it, and to thank our sponsor, which is Longevity Drops. And, you know, you brought up the word art and you brought up the word taste in the midst of that. And one of the things I appreciate about the Longevity Drops is that they are really an artistic creation that will not guarantee our health in the same way that yoga won't. However, they will have some influence on it. And part of how I actually just came to me that I'm relating the Longevity Drops and herbal medicine in general to yoga is, you know, part of what we're creating in the yoga experience is an upliftment of prana or energy, or some would say coming back to our natural essence. And that's what the herbal tonic does also, is takes, you know, these very potent, sometimes sexual, or some would call pranic stimulating herbs, and utilizes them to increase our vitality. And we're still walking around and living in a world that's toxic and difficult, and we've got stresses. Yet if we get more of that natural vitality, then hey, life is a lot easier. And they're super tasty and easy to use, which also helps. And while I'm on it, in terms of sales pitches or informational, educational pieces as to things that might help your lives, y'all. In addition to Longevity Drops, I have something brand new that I am just putting out into the world, and I'm really excited about it. And those of y'all that know me, part of my big mission in life is to bring the non-physical, beyond physical, paraphysical, metaphysical aspect of yoga out into the world. And, you know, and that's part of what I do on the trainings. And now, after all these years of doing it in sort of exotic places that are expensive to get to, I figured out a way, and technology is such a blessing, that I can bring everything that I've learned about yoga, but it really in the big picture of yoga, which includes relationships and emotions and transformation. We'll come back to that word. Psychology, sexuality, tantra, all of that, that I can bring all of that in a way that's like this, you know, that's on the internet and that's recorded and through video and that you can digest as you like. Though perhaps more importantly, we also have live coaching calls twice a month where, because, you know, in the end, and like what I appreciate about yoga also being a physical philosophy, it's not what you know, it's what you actually apply in your lives. And so I'm super grateful to have this new program, call it a mentorship, a membership, spiritual mentorship, where I can work with you directly one-on-one in the context of a group and figure out how to apply the lessons of yoga and everything that we've learned with spirituality in your life in a way that actually works and results in more energy, more happiness, more satisfaction, fulfillment. And if y'all are interested in that, as a special thank you for our viewers, well, one is there is a introductory offer on it for the next 6 days, I believe it is. So time is of the essence. And the other is, if any of you viewers of this show want to join in, I will also give you a one-to-one coaching session as a way to kick off your experience of it, a jump start of it. So you can just email me, daniel@danielaaron.com, if you want to go for that. Let me know. And enough said on all that. Let me know if you got questions. Edward.
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent.
My longevity drops and I'm back.
Well, you know, boy, in terms of what I just said, I suppose that brings me around to applicability. What would you say in terms of, you know, I don't know, maybe 20%, 50% of our viewers are probably practicing yoga of one sort or another. All this philosophical talk that we have in considering infinity and how much influence do we have on our lives, how does that, how can that make a difference in an ordinary person's life on a day-to-day basis? Or can it?
Yeah, well, I don't know. If again, that would be sort of like, you know, projecting something that is very difficult to really ascertain with much accuracy. I think one develops an appreciation for the immediacy, the immediacy of the actual what is going on right now. Now. That it's going. This is what's happening at the moment. This is, you know, and of course, skills of projection into the future are very useful, and reflection, you know, thinking about the past, it has its uses, but it is a difficult thing to become skilled at sustained immersion in what's going on in the moment. And that, of course, there is no such thing as a moment in the flow, I should be saying. I think the appreciation of the transitory may be something that whatever is going on, it will pass. So you're happy, it will pass. You're sad, it will pass. It's not, you know, the emotional states you're going through, they will pass. It's interesting you were saying, you introduced the word spiritual, and I think people, I'd like to know, discuss with you here, with everybody listening, what we think the difference is between the spiritual and the material. And I get first shot because I introduced the subject, and then you must agree with everything I say. I would say that contrary to what normal thinking would state, I think people are too spiritual and have a great deal of difficulty actually being material. And by spiritual, I'm not talking about thinking about God, or I don't know, whatever it is, what people actually do think they're doing when they're being spiritual. I suppose they think they're not being grasping and acquisitive, and that's what's being material. But here's the thing. It seems to me that the distinguishing thing about materiality is that it refers to matter, that which is. But the nature of that which has become, which is it's transitory. It's already stopped becoming, and the only way in which we sense it at all is through our senses. Aha, that would make sense. You sense through the senses, or perhaps there's some intellectual ideation about it. But our actual contact with matter is mediated through our sensual appreciation of it, and so we get electrochemical symbols sent through to our nervous system, and these present in various parts of the brain, and we construct an idea about what the table is, or the horse is, or that other person is, or what this grass feels like, or what the temperature of the air is. But our direct contact with it is mediated. Whereas just because it's very cold where I am in London today, but if I were to step into this, if I'd just been somewhere in an ice cap and step into, oh my goodness, it's only -2 degrees here, that's centigrade, folks, it would maybe seem, oh, it's kind of warm. So there's a relativity to it. It's not like our appreciation of matter is an absolutely factual thing. Instead, it's made up of our thoughts or awareness of that. And the tangibility of these thoughts there, our ability to statistically weigh them up, the nature of that is very spiritual, and that's where we spend all our time. I mean, it's spiritual in the sense that it has no quantifiable substance. So it seems to me that whilst the level of the spirituality may be quite base or vulgar in some way, but it does seem to me that that's where we spend a lot of our time, maybe all of it, whereas our direct contact with matter is less so. Does one get better at contacting matter? And I'm suggesting here that I'm talking about the other. And I said the word melancholy earlier, but maybe I meant yearning. And I think people get into yoga or consider themselves spiritual because they do have a yearning for a contact with something. I'm trying to liken it to Wordsworth. Somehow keeps coming up in my mind. Of course, I often think about Wordsworth, constantly reviewing the Romantic poets. Looking back perhaps on a scene that you've seen from your childhood and remembering playing there as a child, but now you're old and gray and you know how bad life can be, and you see the young children playing where you used to play, and there's a melancholic yearning towards that which used to be, a sweet sorrowfulness, perhaps you would say, to it. And somehow that yearning seems to equate with this reaching out, this longing to contact the universe. I'm going back to this theme, the oneness, the thing that we feel out of contact with, that which is the flow. And having gotten myself right to the place where I should have seen that that was the end of the sentence, I am now at the end of the sentence. Daniel, what do you think about spirit and matter in that regard?
Well, this is probably notching it down a few levels from the place where you were speaking about it. One of the things that came to me is you could take the idea of being spiritual as opposed to dealing with matter. And along the way, I kept also hearing one of my favorite questions that I ask myself every day, which is what matters, and there's the great, what actually does matter and what matters. And I use the question of what matters for myself to say, where is my focus right now? And is it that I'm focusing on this, and this, usually in the future, or this material thing, or this worry, or this fear? And I use it as a guiding question for myself to say, what matters? Where do I want to choose to place my focus? That is a little bit of an aside, though, from part of what I took from what you were saying, Edward, is that people are too spiritual, and perhaps in the sense, and not sufficiently material, in that they are in the material world, yet not aware of it, not present in it. Perhaps their minds, their imagination's gone into, well, and I say they, my mind and imagination lost.
It's hard to escape.
Yeah. Lost in some other realm that has nothing to do with the here and now. And of course, we all know, we've heard that the here and now is where it's all happening, and the essence of spirituality. So, and again, I think that brings us back to what's so cool about yoga, and why I glommed onto it when I found it after being deep in the intellectual universities, philosophical worlds, is it does deal with matter, and it's practical, and there's a measure for our awareness, and there's a tangibility to it that is often not there in other philosophical or spiritual or esoteric pursuits.
I do think that's what's extraordinary, and the physical aspect of yoga. It's been demeaned perhaps by people equating it with, oh, it's just physical. And, for some people, though it's a very strong physical statement, it's a wonderfully contrary thing I'm about to say here. Some people do just go to yoga to be, I'm going to go get fit. I just want to sweat. The last thing I want to hear is somebody gabbing on about what's spiritual, blah, blah, blah. And of course, somebody who is deeply engaged in physical activity to the degree where they're sweating and not actually listening to what's going on, they're strongly involved in a now. I just think there's more to it than that. That's not much to be satisfied with. Although I don't mean, I shouldn't be dismissive like that, because that it's incredibly satisfying to experience the simplicity of, I'm just here sweating.
Absolutely. And I think there's a danger in this whole conversation of pitting one against the other, spiritual or physical. And clearly we are here to be both of those, and it's got to be somehow in the integration of them that we're achieving our purpose. I'm surprised to say it that way, but realizing why we're here in this form, and what I'm excited about is taking the physical stuff of life, which for me means my upsets and my problems and my fears and my excitements and all of that, and somehow distilling that into what does this have to do with a spiritual practice, or what does this have to do with evolution? Well, and then how do you feel about evolution as a word compared to transformation?
Well, of course, I think it's inevitable. Everything must change. I wonder. I guess it's a word that has become freighted inappropriately with a sort of upward trending, but of course that's not actually what would necessarily be implied by it. All change. That's what they say when you get to the end of a line in a train here, and you got to get off. All change. And that's the thing about evolution. Again, it's a not entirely tenable premise, but one of the titillating ones of yoga is that what modicum of influence can you put into the change? That, how responsibly do you affect that which is going on? I think, there's this. It is a reciprocal thing. People in many walks of life, but you hear it a lot in yoga, talk about, we're working on our awareness. And it just seems to be so one-sided. It's all what's coming in. But what is going out is just as important. What it is that is moving from between, what happens in the space between these material objects and how these forms, let's call them. Let's go to sort of Greek philosophy. We'll call them forms. What happens between the influences and the degree of randomness that there is to it, but the degree of direction that you can make about it as well. Earlier I was talking about, artistic process where you are more deliberate in the creation of what you make, because you're putting this vision of that which is familiar in a new light so that it influences things in some way. And, in an Oscar Wilde kind of way, I think that's what one's life is also like that. You can make a degree of influence about what happens in the between space. How's that? Evolution. Go Darwin.
All change. Yes. I'm with you. And this idea about how much influence do we have brings to me also the question of, well, how much influence do we want to have? And going back to the question, or my assertion about yogis being sometimes control freaks, and certainly I place myself squarely in that group. And for a lot of my life, especially in my early yoga life, it was I did my darndest to control everything. And and I wonder, like, there's such a materialistic perspective of wanting to identify and categorize and label and understand everything in the physical world and in our experience, that tends to leave little room for what I might call the mystery, or the unknown. And this may seem, go ahead.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is because it is infinite. It's to a finite creature's perception of it. There has to be ambiguity, and that's part of its delight. I mean, one takes the subjugating the body and the categorization of thoughts and ideas and premises and experiences, perceptions. You take those categories, the ideas, the firm statistical evidence, but it has to be returned to the individual for them to do something with it, rather than just trying to leave it as, good, I've got everything under control. And it's to give one show a new facet of that which is utterly ungraspable. It's the ambiguity is all that you know, both are necessary. You know, an utterly random approach with no discipline would yield, I should think, small results in this way. I would, by way of analogy, look at it in terms of art material. Somebody, you know, some people get the idea that dancing or being an actor or playing music is all about expression. And yes, there is expression in it. But, you know, a 3-year-old banging the keyboard because they're angry is, you know, extremely expressive, but not terribly listenable to. It doesn't reveal much about the nature of rhythm or beauty, or if it does, perhaps it does it in sort of an inverse kind of way. And likewise, people who simply try to, say, on stage, express who they are as a person, generally tends to have less to say to the world at large, because oddly enough, it tends to usually come out in the same way. There is less variety to it. Discipline gives one more variety in one's creativity, and hopefully too then discipline gives one more variety in one's discriminative awareness. Say, I'm trying to get this reciprocal thing back here, that you use subjugation of the body, you use discipline of the mind in order to have a richer and more ambiguous experience. You do it with the full knowledge, as anybody thinking about it is going to recognize. You can't grasp the infinite.
Yeah, it's got to lead to freedom from that perspective. Yeah.
Well, of course, that's terribly liberating. Once you realize, yeah, all this work is actually to be creative. I can do what I want. There are limitations of some kind, but there's so much potential for the things one can do, and that potential is enhanced when you have more control. Still doesn't give you total control, and it still doesn't make, you know, the asteroid could still hit tomorrow, but you know, I suppose the thing is, this is maybe, I think one does it because it's delightful. You actually, the more control you have, the more delight you can experience, the greater your range is. And as you're suggesting, that many people have instead taken the subjugation of thought and body and given themselves less delight. They have, instead of using it to improve their appreciation and their awareness and their experience of beauty and life, they use it to make it less, to winnow themselves down to a very small rut of life. Sorry.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting...
I'm not thinking of anyone in particular, but if you want their initials.
Well, on that note, it's probably an apt time for us to wind down before we do start getting into specific names.
Okay, absolutely. So we've rehearsed our song from The Sound of Music. You ready to do it? Come on, everybody, join in. So long.
Facebook is alive. Okay. All right. Well, you know, and there's good irony here, Edward, as we come to a close, which is for those who have experienced you as a teacher, yoga teacher, in terms of teaching asana, and for those who've been to my training, which you've been part of, there
many times,
will have experienced a whole different level. And for those coming to our training in May, it's rare that we talk in such a highfalutin way like this, where, and you're known more for
good gags, funny jokes, upbeat, up-tempo teaching.
And with just a tiny bit of physical challenge and rigor tossed in there for good measure.
Oh, yeah, just a bit.
Just a tiny bit of that. All right. Well, on that note, then, I think I will say thank you to Longevity Drops once again for sponsoring us and uplifting the health of the universe. And thank you, Edward, for coming on the show, for being a great friend, for being someone who's continually evolving, transforming, changing, and taking this yoga material and making it more real and more applicable, and coming up with new perspectives on it. I really appreciate the way you keep growing in it.
Thank you very much for having me on, and thank you to those of you who've stayed through to the end, and even those who left a little early.
Yeah, and by the way, those of you that are still here, if you've got questions or comments, feel free to toss them in there, say hi. I will go through the comments, and I'm happy to hear from you and respond. Thanks to our producer, Tom, and most of all, y'all on this show, our viewers. Thank you for being interested in making your life into art, into vibrant living. And I'll see you next week. I'm Daniel Aaron. This has been The Art of Vibrant Living. Bye.